Hi everyone! Welcome to my channel. Always remember, ignorance of the law excuses no one. This is Legally Engineer. Somehow, nag-deteriorate, minsan nagkakaroon ng dementia, ganyan. So, para ang initial na iniisip ng mga tao, pag matanda na, hindi na nakapag-isip ng matino, ng maayos, so parang for them, incapacitated na ang mga matatanda to enter into a contract. Pero sinabi lang ng batas, no, it doesn't necessarily follow, diba? Ang rule pa rin is that he is still capacitated to enter into a contract. And ang burden of proving that he is disqualified should be upon him who alleges. Diba? So, okay, so napapag-usapan natin yung vitiation of consent. No? Kanina yung sinabi sa Article 1330. Diba? Now, i-elaborate pa natin kung ano-ano ba yung mga yan. Because it's very important na makita natin kung ano ang iba't ibang uri ng instances wherein na-vitiate yung consent. So, first is error or mistake.
Yes, error or mistake. So, a wrong or false notion about such matter, a belief in the existence of some circumstance, fact, or event, which in reality does not exist. Parang nag-hallucinate. Or mistake.
Yeah, so, wrong, mali, or false notion daw about a matter, no? Naniniwala ka na nag-exist yung isang bagay or isang circumstance, pero in truth or in fact, hindi naman pala.
That does not really exist. So, because mistake is contemplated as a mistake of fact which may be due to a party's ignorance or lack of knowledge.
So this mistake of fact shall be substantial, which means that a contracting party must not have given consent had he known the existence of such mistake. Because not all kinds of mistake will actually vitiate consent and would make a contract voidable. So, kapag ikaw nag-enter ka into a contract and there are certain facts na ignorant ka o hindi mo alam, tapos because you didn't know na nag-exist yung circumstance na yun, nag-enter ka into a contract,
you gave your consent,
that is what you call mistake of fact na sinasabi. And it must be substantial. And it substantial to the point that the party will not give his consent had he known of such the existence of the mistake. So that's mistake. Now, yung error naman, kailan nangyayari yung error?
Error of law is likewise a mistake, but it refers to mistake in the existence of a legal provision or on the interpretation or application thereof. So,
error of law. Nag-vitiate siya ng consent. Eh, di ba meron nga tayong rule under Article 3 that ignorance of the law excuses no one. So,
that is the general rule. So, the general rule natin dito, ignorance of the law excuses no one from compliance therewith under Article 3 of the New Civil Code.
So, may exception pa?
May exception under Article 1334, which provides that a mutual error as regards the legal effect of an agreement when the real purpose of the parties is frustrated may vitiate consent. Mutual error of law.
Kasi kung hindi naman mutual yung error.
So, ikaw lang ang nagkamali. So, hindi papasok dun sa mistake. In that case, dahil walang mistake, walang vitiation of consent, valid ang contract. Pero kung mutual error as regards to a provision of law, or interpretation of a provision of law, magiging voidable yung contract because of the error of law. Voidable.
Kung dahil sa error na yun, mafu-frustrate yung real purpose. No? So, mag-vitiate talaga yung consent in that case. Okay? Now, after mistake, may nabanggit doon sa 1330
yung violence or force, intimidation, or threat, or duress.
So, that's covered under Article 1335 of the Civil Code.
So, violence or force requires the use or employment of physical force. For consent given to be defective, the force that was employed must be either serious or irresistible. In both instances, consent cannot be said to be free. However, the force employed must have been the determining cause why consent was given for the contract. Again, so sinabi na naman dyan, again, kagaya ng sa error of law or sa mistake of fact that the force employed must have been the determining cause why consent was given for the contract. So kung wala nung violence or force that was exerted by the other party, consent would not be given.
Okay. Yeah. So, meron din tayong tinatawag na intimidation or threat. So,
yes.
unlike violence, it need not resort to exertion of a physical force since intimidation is internal while violence is external. Kanina kasi external nga, right?
Physical
harapan,
force.
may physical force yung violence or force. Ngayon naman, pag intimidation or threat, hindi kailangan na may nag-exert ng physical force.
Yes.
Kasi nga, internal yung intimidation or threat. So in order to vitiate consent, the following requisites must concur pagdating to intimidation or threat.
First, dapat the intimidation or threat must have produced a reasonable and well-grounded fear of an evil. Pangalawa, the said evil must be so imminent and grave. Pantatlo, the evil must be upon his person or property or that of his spouse, descendants or ascendants. And fourth, the same must be the reason why he enters into a contract.
So, dapat mag-exist itong mga requisites na to. And may nabanggit dyan na dapat daw may reasonable and well-grounded fear of an evil. Pag sinabi natin reasonable fear, this is fear that must be commensurate with the threat. Commensurate naman dun sa threat. So, baka naman nag-overreact ka lang dun sa threat. Yung pag sinabi nating person dito, kasi di ba sabi natin na that the evil must be upon his person or property. Yung person dito, you have to take note that the term person is not just limited to the life and physical integrity, but this also includes the liberty and honor. And it covers all injuries which are not patrimonial in nature. Halimbawa, hindi lang daw physical integrity, but also includes liberty and honor. Halimbawa,
pag hindi mo pinagbenta sa akin yung lupa, ipagkakalat ko na kabit mo si X.
Okay. Would that be considered as
that is a
intimidation
threat
or
upon
threat?
his
Honor.
Oo, upon his physical integrity. Pero will it suffice to be a threat produced as a reasonable and well-grounded fear of an evil? Hindi.
Hindi rin.
Hindi. So, hindi. Kailangan mag-concur yung apat na requisites.
Mag-concur yung apat na yan. Okay. Kung halimbawa, attorney, pag di mo binenta sa akin yung lupang papatayin ko nanay mo.
Ayan.
Hindi naman ako. Hindi naman ako eh.
Nakalagay doon, the evil must be upon his person or property or that of his spouse, descendants, or ascendants. So, valid yun. Talagang reasonable and well-grounded fear of an evil.
Kasi yung nanay ko, she is my ascendant. Halimbawa naman, papatayin yung anak ko, descendant ko yun. Yung asawa ko, spouse. So, vitiated consent.
So, paano nga yung papatayin ko si Muning? Property. The evil must be upon his property.
Yeah, property. That could be kung property.
Okay.
Like, let's see what the Supreme Court would tell. Ikaw, sige nga, anong take mo in that case?
Not valid.
Not valid.
Oo. Ano pa rin siya? Valid pa rin yung contract. Rather pala. Valid yung contract for me. It will not vitiate consent. Yung intimidation or threat na papatayin ko si Muning or yung favorite pet.
Dog.
It will, for me, it will not vitiate consent.
Sa akin din, it wouldn't vitiate consent. So,
again, opinion namin. Oo.
Tago mo yung puso mo yung aso. That's just our opinion. So, let the Supreme Court decide on that matter. Right? So, now let's go to Article 1336. This is about, again, violence or intimidation,
which violence or intimidation shall annul the obligation, although it may have been employed by a third person who did not take part in the contract. So, in the violence or intimidation, it will annul the obligation, although it is employed by a stranger or a third person who is a stranger to the parties in the contract.
Kung halimbawa naman yan halimbawa ako, nag-hire ako ng mga hitman o kaya mga bodyguards o mga tauhan ko para takutin ka. Third person yung mga yan kasi tayo naman ang mag-enter into a contract. Pero ang sinasabi ng 1336,
Even if employed
even
by
if-
a third person who is not party to a contract, it will annul the obligation provided nandun pa rin yung apat na requisite in order to vitiate consent.
Kasi ang materiality dito, it's not about the person who's giving the
Yes.
intimidation or violence,
Yes.
but the fact that he or she decided to give his or her consent
Consent.
because of the violence or
Yes.
intimidation, regardless where that violence is
It's
coming
coming
from.
from.
Diba? Kasi magiging superfluous naman kung stick mo lang dun sa party to the
Party.
contract kasi nga marami namang pwedeng gawing ibang pamamaraan para makuha mo yung consent, diba?
Yes.
So, very wise ang batas. No, punta tayo sa undue influence.
There is undue influence when a person takes improper advantage of his power over the will of another, depriving the latter of a reasonable freedom of choice. Yan. Wala ka ng sariling choice. Siya
gusto
na
mo
lang
ba
lang
yan?
siya yung namili para
mo ba yan?
sa'yo. Hindi.
Toxic
Ayoko
ang
na.
ganyang
Oo.
relationship. Relationship na
Undue
pala.
Undue influence.
Yan, halimbawa, ako, aral ako, diba? Tapos, may gusto akong bilhin lupa, tapos yung may-ari ng lupa nun, isang magsasaka na, sabihin natin, hindi marunong magsulat, hindi marunong bumasa. Tapos ako, tinake advantage ko yung lack of education of that person so that I can, secure
His consent.
and for my advantage. In that case, that is undue
Undue
influence.
influence.
Okay? And the following circumstances shall be considered in this case. One, confidential family, spiritual, and other relations between the parties.
Second, yung mental weakness. You take advantage of the mental weakness or ignorance of a person. And financial distress of the person alleged to have been unduly influenced. Dahil sobrang kapit siya sa patalim, wala siyang magawa.
Benta mo na yan sa akin. Wala.
Bibilhin ko na yung bahay mo worth 100,000. Two-story yung bahay. It's worth 100,000. So kung pumayag, possible na merong undue influence because of financial distress. Kaya niya binigay yung consent niya to sell his house because of his financial distress. So pwedeng manal yung contract.
Yung sinasabi ko naman kanina, yung taking advantage of the person who's uneducated, that's ignorance. No?
Mental weakness.
Mental weakness. Okay? Now, so tapos na tayo sa undue influence, nandun tayo sa pang-apat, yung fraud or deceit. Fraud exists when, through the insidious words or machinations of one of the contracting parties, the other party is induced to enter into a contract which, without those, he would not have agreed to. So, narinig nyo naman na yung fraud na yan sa mga pauna nating discussion. But in this case, ito yung fraud na mag-vitiate ng consent resulting to a voidable contract. So, there are different kinds of fraud. Alam natin yan. Ano ba yung una?
Merong causal fraud and may incidental fraud. Review na lang to, kasama yan sa exam nyo, no midterms, take note. So, causal fraud is the fraud committed by one of the contracting parties before or at the time of the celebration of the contract so as to secure the consent of the other. It may be committed through insidious words or machinations or by concealment of facts which should have been divulged.
So yung insidious words or machinations na sinasabi dito, Attorney Way, it includes any misrepresentation in words or actions done with a fraudulent purpose. Nangyayari naman talaga yan eh.
So yung causal fraud, ito na yung it will make the contract voidable. Ito na yung pinag-uusapan natin ngayon na causal fraud. Because without which, the parties would not have given their consent to be bound by the contract.
So kasi itong causal fraud, isinasama or kinukommit ng isang party prior to or at the time of the celebration of the contract just to secure yung consent. Ano ba, yung sa contract of sale, kapag mga bibilin ka, di ba lagi namang ang gagawin dyan ng mga sellers is lahat ng kagandahan, no? Ipapakita.
Bumili ka ng sing-sing, for example, wedding ring. Sinabi mo na, ay, gold to, pero knowing na hindi naman talaga gold yung itinitinda mo. Ano lang yan? Coated. Coated lang ng gold.
So, in that case, may concealment.
May concealment, may deceit.
na hindi dinivulge. So in that case,
there is causal fraud, so it will make the contract voidable. Yes.
So how about incidental?
Incidental fraud, ito naman yun. The kind of fraud which does not have such a decisive influence. By itself, this fraud cannot cause the giving of consent, but it only refers to some particular or accident of the person employing it to pay damages. So, doon naman kanina, sa bibili ka ng wedding ring, talaga namang wedding ring yung tinitinda niya. Pero at that time na i-deliver na niya sa'yo yung wedding ring, pinalitan niya ng ibang quality, hindi gold. So, in that case, the party will be obliged to pay damages. Fraud din yun. Pero incidental fraud yun.
Pero perfectly valid yung contract.
Yes, perfectly valid yung contract. Hindi siya voidable. Although fraud din yun, pero it is fraud committed at the time of the performance
of the
obligation or after the valid contract has been entered into.
So, malino naman yan sa mga students natin. Na-discuss natin yan. Diba? So, incidental fraud and causal fraud na meron tayo. And lastly, meron tayong misrepresentation. And ano ba itong misrepresentation na to? Attorney Uy, can it be committed by a third person?
Yes. Yung misrepresentation by a third person does not vitiate consent unless, of course, such misrepresentation has created substantial mistake and the same is mutual. So, general rule natin, fraud committed by a third person does not vitiate the contract.
Exceptions. If a third person is in connivance or collusion with one of the contracting parties, then he shall be considered as an accomplice to the fraud and such contract shall become voidable. So if it can be proven that the third person actually connived, nakisapakat with one of the contracting parties, then siya ay accomplice doon.
Yes.
And voidable ang ating status ng ating contract.
Yes. So, also, another exception, if a third person is not in collusion with any of the contracting parties, but it leads them both into error or mutual error, then the consent is considered as vitiated. Thus, the contract is said to be voidable.
So, basta ang kailangan dyan is may mutual error as between the parties.
So, how about misrepresentations made in good faith? Does it vitiate consent?
Well, it's not fraudulent, but it may constitute error. Kasi pag in good faith naman talaga yan. So,
no intention to commit fraud.
There's no intention to commit that fraud. But
So, that is
again,
not
it may constitute
fraudulent
error. So you have to check kung substantial.
So kung di man siya fraud, papatak sa error naman, which also vitiates consent.
Depende pa rin. Kung yung error is
mutual. Kung error of law, kailangan mutual. Pero mistake of fact, ignorance. Ignorance and substantial.
Yeah, dapat substantial siya.
Yes.
Okay? So take note of that. Hindi porket in good faith ay automatic na hindi mabivitiate ang consent. Okay. Pagdating dito sa area na to, pwede bang mangyari na magkaroon ng contract pero no intention naman talaga to create such contract?
Yes, in that case, ang tawag doon is simulation of contracts.
Ano ibig sabihin nun?
So, it is a declaration of a fictitious will deliberately made by agreement of the parties in order to produce, for the purposes of deception, the appearance of a juridical act which does not exist or is different from that which was really executed. So, there are two kinds of simulated contracts. Meron tayong absolute and meron din tayong relative.
Okay. So, ang absolutely simulated contract, this kind of simulation takes place when the contracting parties do not actually intend to be bound at all.
Yes.
Clearly, an absolutely simulated or fictitious contract is void kasi wala talagang intention to be bound at all. Okay. How about relative?
So, relative simulation, this kind of simulation takes place when the parties would conceal their true agreement. In a relatively simulated contract, the parties are bound to their real agreements when such simulation does not prejudice a third person, and is not intended for any purpose contrary to law, morals, good customs, public order, or public policy.
Okay. Take note na magkaibang effect.
Pag absolutely simulated ang contract, that is a void contract because
Kasi
the parties
absence.
do not intend to be bound up at all, so there is absence of consent. When it comes to relative, the contract is valid and the parties are bound to their
By their
original
deal.
agreement, provided a third person is not prejudiced and the intention of the parties to enter into that relatively simulated contract is not contrary to law.
Take note of the difference between the absolute and relative simulation of contracts. Yung effects nila as to the status of the contract. Now, Attorney Uy, can there be recovery under absolutely simulated contracts?
So it depends. If the simulated contract does not have illicit purpose or hindi naman illegal yung purpose ng simulated contract, simulation must be proved in order to recover what may have been given.
But if the simulated
On
contract
the other hand, kung ang simulated contract naman ay may illegal object or illegal purpose, then the party shall be considered with unclean hands such that in pari delicto rules shall apply. Kasi sabi nga natin, those who come to court must come with clean hands. So in pari delicto, the in pari delicto rule will apply. Kasi in this case, kasi both are considered in fault. Kasi nga illegal yung purpose. Kagaya ng bentahan ng shabu. Nagbenta ako ng shabu kay Attorney Maralit worth 20,000. Naibigay ko yung shabu kay Attorney Maralit. Si Attorney Maralit hindi nagbayad sa akin. Diba? So, can I go after Attorney Maralit and file a case against him in court?